The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in late March 1882, catching Kyle Anderson completely off guard as he nursed his coffee in a boarding house in Kansas City, Missouri. Kyle had been drifting from job to job for the better part of 3 years, ever since his parents died in a fire that consumed their modest farm outside Lawrence, Kansas. At 26, he found himself with no ties, no prospects, and a growing sense that life was passing him by while he watched from the sidelines. The telegram was from a lawyer in Rapid City, Dakota Territory, informing him that a distant uncle he barely remembered had left him property. The message was brief, almost dismissive in its brevity, but it mentioned a ranch and requested his presence to finalize the transfer. Kyle packed his few belongings into a worn leather satchel and caught the next train heading west. The journey took him through rolling prairies that stretched endlessly under impossibly blue skies, past settlements that seemed to spring up overnight with the railroad's expansion, and finally, into the rugged territory of Dakota. Rapid City was a rough town, still raw from the gold rush years, filled with prospectors who had stayed too long and cowboys who worked the expanding cattle ranches. The lawyer's office was above a general store, cramped and smelling of old paper and tobacco smoke. Mr. Henderson was a thin man with spectacles that constantly slid down his nose, and he seemed perpetually irritated by their very existence. "Your Uncle Silas never married, had no children," Henderson explained, shuffling through documents. "He owned a property about 40 miles southwest of here. Ranch, technically, though he never did much with it from what I understand. Been abandoned for going on 8 years now." "Why did he leave it to me?" Kyle asked, genuinely puzzled. He could barely recall meeting Uncle Silas more than once or twice as a child. Henderson shrugged. "You were his closest living relative. The property taxes are paid through the end of the year. After that, it's your responsibility. There's also the matter of the purchase price." Kyle's heart sank. "Purchase price? The estate has debts. Not substantial, but enough that we need to liquidate assets. You can purchase the ranch for $500 or we sell it at auction next month." $500. Kyle had exactly $537 to his name, the remnants of what he had saved from selling his parents' burned farm and 3 years of sporadic work. It was everything he had in the world. He thought about it for approximately 10 seconds before nodding. "I'll take it." Henderson seemed surprised but pleased. "Very well. Let me draw up the papers." An hour later, Kyle walked out of that office as a landowner, though he had no idea what condition the land was in or whether it had any value whatsoever. He purchased supplies, a decent horse, and a pack mule, which depleted his remaining funds to almost nothing, and set out the next morning following Henderson's rough directions. The ride took him through increasingly isolated country. The Black Hills rose in the distance, dark and mysterious against the spring sky. The trail he followed was overgrown in places, suggesting few people traveled this route anymore. He passed abandoned claims and the skeletal remains of failed homesteads, testament to the harsh reality that the Dakota Territory did not surrender its secrets or its bounty easily. It was late afternoon on the second day when Kyle finally spotted the ranch. It sat in a small valley, protected on 3 sides by low hills covered in pine and juniper. A creek, swollen with snowmelt, ran along the eastern boundary. The main house was a log structure, weathered but still standing, with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. There was a barn, listing slightly to one side, and several other outbuildings in various states of disrepair. As Kyle rode closer, his heart sank a little. The place looked thoroughly abandoned. Weeds grew waist-high in what might have once been a yard, and several windows were broken. The fence posts of what had probably been corrals leaned at drunken angles, their rails long since disappeared, likely taken for firewood by passing travelers. He was so focused on cataloging the decay that he almost missed the smoke. It was just a thin wisp, barely visible against the sky, rising from the stone chimney of the main house. Kyle reined in his horse, suddenly alert. Someone was here. Squatters, probably. He had heard about people taking over abandoned properties, and while he did not consider himself a violent man, this was his land now, paid for with everything he had. Kyle approached cautiously, his hand resting on the old revolver he wore at his hip. He had not fired it in months, and he hoped he would not have to start now. As he drew closer, he noticed other signs of habitation. The porch had been swept recently. There was a small vegetable garden, neatly tended, on the south side of the house. Firewood was stacked with precision against the wall. He dismounted, tying his horse to a post that seemed sturdy enough, and climbed the 3 steps to the porch. Before he could knock, the door swung open, and Kyle found himself staring down the barrel of a Winchester rifle held by the most striking woman he had ever seen. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid that fell over one shoulder. Her face was sun-bronzed, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of amber in sunlight. She wore men's work clothes, dusty trousers and a faded blue shirt, and she held the rifle with the easy competence of someone who knew how to use it. "That's far enough," she said, her voice steady despite the situation. "State your business." Kyle raised his hand slowly. "My name is Kyle Anderson. I'm the new owner of this property. Just bought it from my uncle's estate in Rapid City." The woman's eyes narrowed. "That's impossible. Silas Anderson died years ago, and this place has been abandoned since." "I have the deed right here," Kyle said carefully, moving his hand very slowly toward his jacket pocket. "May I show you?" She considered for a long moment, then nodded curtly. Kyle withdrew the folded papers and held them out. The woman gestured with the rifle barrel for him to lay them on the porch railing, which he did. She moved forward, keeping the rifle trained on him with one hand while she awkwardly unfolded the papers with the other. Kyle watched her face as she read, seeing disbelief give way to confusion, then something like resignation. When she looked up, some of the hardness had left her eyes, replaced by wary exhaustion. "This cannot be happening," she said, more to herself than to him. "I'm sorry, miss, but I don't even know who you are or why you are living on my property," Kyle said, trying to keep his voice gentle despite his own confusion. She lowered the rifle slightly. "My name is Rose Thompson. I've been living here for 3 years. 3 years. By whose permission?" Rose's jaw tightened. "My own. This place was abandoned, falling apart. I've worked hard to make it livable again. I've repaired the roof, fixed the well, cleared the land. I've put everything I have into this place." Kyle felt a headache beginning behind his eyes. "Miss Thompson, I understand this is difficult, but I own this ranch legally. I paid $500 for it, which was everything I had. I'm not trying to be cruel, but I need you to understand my position." "Your position?" Rose's voice rose with anger. "You rode up here on a horse, waving some papers, and expect me to just leave. I have nowhere else to go. This is my home." "How did you even end up here?" Kyle asked, genuinely curious now. Rose was quiet for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. She lowered the rifle completely, though she did not set it down. "Come inside. If we are going to discuss this, we might as well not do it on the porch." The interior of the house surprised Kyle. It was clean and well organized with simple but sturdy furniture. Wildflowers sat in a jar on a rough-hewn table. The wooden floor had been scrubbed clean, and the stone fireplace radiated warmth. This was clearly a home, not just a shelter. Rose set the rifle by the door and moved to the fireplace, where a pot of something that smelled wonderful simmered. She did not offer Kyle anything, but she poured herself a cup of coffee from a pot on the stove. "I came from Ohio originally," she began, staring into the fire. "3 years ago I was engaged to be married. His name was David Morrison, a farmer's son. We were supposed to build a life together. Then I discovered he was already married to a woman in Cleveland. He had been living 2 lives, courting me while he had a wife and 2 children elsewhere." Kyle winced. "That's terrible." "The scandal destroyed my reputation," Rose continued, her voice flat. "My family was humiliated. My father told me I had brought shame on them. He gave me $100 and told me to go west, to start over where no one knew me. So I did. I worked as a cook in Rapid City for a few months, saved what I could. Then I heard about this place from a prospector who used to work these hills. He said there was an abandoned ranch, well-watered, good land, just sitting empty. So you just moved in." Rose turned to face him, her chin raised defiantly. "I did, and I have made it into something. The garden produces vegetables. I hunt rabbits and deer. The creek never runs dry. I have worked harder in these 3 years than I ever did in my entire life before, and I have made this place a home. My home." Kyle sank into one of the chairs at the table, suddenly bone-tired. "I don't know what to tell you, Miss Thompson. I'm not a rich man. I cannot just give you money and walk away. This ranch is all I have too." They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the bubbling of whatever was cooking in the pot. Kyle studied Rose when she was not looking. Despite the men's clothes and the rifle and the defensive anger, he could see the vulnerability beneath. She was afraid, he realized. Afraid of losing the life she had built, afraid of being cast out again. An idea began to form in his mind. It was wild, probably foolish, but he had been drifting for so long that perhaps foolish was exactly what he needed. "What if you stayed?" he said abruptly. Rose turned to stare at him. "What? What if you stayed? You clearly know this land, you have been working it." "I know nothing about ranching. I can learn, but it would be easier with someone who already knows the place." "You want me to work for you?" There was ice in her voice. "No," Kyle said quickly. "Not exactly. More like partners. We could work the ranch together, make it profitable. Split everything 50-50. Rose laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That would never work. People would talk. A man and woman, unmarried, living together. I fled one scandal. I will not create another. Then we get married." The words hung in the air between them. Kyle could not believe he had just said them, but now that they were out, he did not take them back. Rose looked at him as if he had lost his mind. "You are insane," she said finally. "Probably," Kyle agreed. "But think about it. It would be a business arrangement, a marriage of convenience. You keep your home, I get someone who knows the land. We work together to make the ranch successful. No scandal, no questions from neighbors. We just met," Rose pointed out, though Kyle noticed she had not outright rejected the idea. "True. But I have a feeling we're both running from something. Maybe we stop running and start building instead." Rose studied him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face. Kyle tried to look trustworthy, though he was not sure what trustworthy was supposed to look like. "This is completely insane," Rose said again, but her voice was softer now, considering. "That doesn't mean it is wrong." "I would need conditions," Rose said slowly. "Rules. Of course. Separate bedrooms. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more, agreed. Equal say in all decisions about the ranch. 50-50 partners," Kyle confirmed. Rose was quiet again, turning to stare into the fire. Kyle waited, hardly breathing. He knew his suggestion was reckless, that he was proposing to marry a woman he had known for less than an hour, but something about the situation felt right. Maybe it was the way she had stood up to him with that rifle. Maybe it was the way she had turned this abandoned house into a home. Maybe he was just tired of drifting. "All right," Rose said finally, so quietly he almost missed it. "All right." She turned to face him, and for the first time she almost smiled. "All right, Kyle Anderson, I will marry you, but if you turn out to be another David Morrison, I will shoot you." "Fair enough," Kyle said, and found himself smiling back. They rode to Rapid City together 2 days later. The journey gave them time to talk, to begin the strange process of getting to know the person they were about to marry. Kyle told her about his parents, about the fire, about 3 years of wandering. Rose shared more about her life in Ohio, about a mother who had died when she was young, about a father more concerned with appearances than his daughter's happiness. The wedding was a quick civil ceremony in Judge Harmon's office, with the judge's clerk and wife serving as witnesses. Rose wore her only dress, a simple gray thing that had seen better days. Kyle wore his cleanest shirt. They exchanged vows with all the romance of a business transaction, and when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Kyle offered his hand to shake. Rose looked at it for a moment, then shook it firmly. "Well, Mrs. Anderson," Kyle said as they walked out into the spring sunshine, "shall we go home?" The word home seemed to catch Rose off guard. Her expression softened slightly. "Yes, let's go home." The first weeks of their arrangement were awkward. They moved around each other carefully, like strangers sharing a boarding house, polite and distant. Kyle took one of the smaller bedrooms, leaving Rose with the larger one she had been using. They divided the work without much discussion. Rose continued tending her garden and hunting small game. Kyle focused on repairing the barn and outbuildings, assessing what could be salvaged and what needed to be rebuilt from scratch. The barn required the most work. The roof had partially collapsed on one side, letting in years of rain and snow. Kyle spent long days hauling away rotted wood and replacing beams. It was hard, physical work that left him exhausted by evening, but it felt good to build something, to have a purpose. Rose, he discovered, was an excellent cook. Despite their limited supplies, she could make something delicious from almost nothing. Rabbit stew with wild onions, cornbread with honey, trout from the creek, pan-fried with herbs she grew in pots on the windowsill. They ate together in the evenings, conversation stilted at first, gradually becoming easier. "You are good with your hands," Rose observed one evening, watching him flex his sore fingers. "My father was a carpenter, taught me young. I just wish I remembered more." "You are doing fine work on the barn. It will hold now." The simple praise warmed him more than it should have. "Your garden is impressive. Those tomato plants look healthy. They should be ready by late summer. I put in extra this year, thinking I might be able to sell some in town." "That's a good idea. We will need income eventually." The word came naturally now, and neither of them remarked on it. One morning in late April, Kyle was working on the corral fence when he heard a horse approaching. He straightened, shading his eyes against the sun. A lone rider was coming up the valley, moving at an easy pace. As the figure drew closer, Kyle could see it was a man older with a weathered face and a white beard. "Hello, the house," the rider called, raising a hand in greeting. Rose emerged from the house, and Kyle noticed she had the rifle, though she held it casually at her side. The rider noticed too and chuckled. "Smart woman. Can't be too careful out here. Name's Martin Hayes. I run cattle on the range east of here." "Kyle Anderson," Kyle said, moving forward to shake the man's hand. "This is my wife, Rose." Hayes tipped his hat to Rose. "Madam, I heard Silas's place finally sold. Glad to see someone making use of it. Silas was a good man, just never had the heart for ranching after his wife passed." "You knew my uncle?" Kyle asked, surprised. Sure did. We would get together a few times a year, share news, help each other out when needed. That's how things work out here. Your nearest neighbors might be miles away, but they are still your neighbors if you follow me. We appreciate that, Mr. Hayes, Rose said, her voice cautious but not unfriendly. I actually came by with a proposition, Hayes continued. I have about 200 head of cattle, but my range is getting overgrazed. Your valley here with that creek would be perfect summer grazing. I could pay you to run some of my herd on your land, give you a start on some income, and I get healthy grass for my stock. Kyle and Rose exchanged glances. Could we discuss it and get back to you? Kyle asked. Of course. No rush. I will be by this way again in a few days. After Hayes left, Kyle and Rose sat on the porch, watching the sun move across the sky. What do you think? Kyle asked. The valley could support cattle. The grass is good and the creek would water them easily. But we would need to repair the fences, make sure his animals do not wander. That's doable. The income would help. We are going to need supplies, tools, seed. Rose nodded slowly. Then I think we should do it. When Hayes returned 3 days later, they accepted his offer. He would pay them $25 a month through the summer and autumn to graze 50 head on their land. It was not a fortune, but it was a start. The arrival of the cattle changed the rhythm of the ranch. Kyle spent long days riding the fence line, checking for breaks, ensuring the animals had access to water. Rose began making cheese and butter to sell in town, using milk from the 2 cows Hayes had included in the arrangement. They were building something together, slowly but steadily. As spring turned to summer, the awkwardness between them began to fade. Kyle found himself looking forward to their evening meals, to hearing Rose's thoughts on the day. She had a sharp wit and a practical wisdom that complemented his own more impulsive nature. More than once, her caution had saved him from making a costly mistake. One evening in early June, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and purple as the sun set behind the hills. The air was warm, filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers. I never thanked you, Rose said suddenly. Kyle turned to look at her. For what? For not forcing me to leave, for offering an alternative even if it was insane. I think we have both benefited from our insane arrangement, Kyle said, smiling. I would have been completely lost without you. I still do not know half of what I am doing. You are learning quickly. She paused, then added quietly, I like working with you. You listen when I have ideas. You do not dismiss them just because I am a woman. Your ideas are usually better than mine, Kyle said honestly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Kyle was intensely aware of Rose's presence beside him, the way the fading light caught in her hair, the graceful line of her profile. Over the past months, he had grown to admire her strength, her resilience, her determination. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped thinking of their marriage as merely a business arrangement. Kyle, Rose said softly, can I ask you something? When you proposed this arrangement, was it really just about the ranch? The question caught him off guard. He could lie, keep things simple and uncomplicated, but Rose deserved honesty. At first, yes, he admitted. But even that first day, there was something about you. The way you stood up to me, the way you had made a home here against all odds, I admired that. And these past months, getting to know you, I have come to realize how rare you are, how special. Rose turned to look at him, her amber eyes wide. Kyle, I am not asking anything of you, he said quickly. I know we agreed this was just business. I just wanted you to know that for me, it has become more than that. You have become important to me. The silence that followed felt enormous. Kyle's heart hammered in his chest. He had ruined everything, pushed too hard, too fast. Rose would retreat behind her walls and they would go back to being strangers sharing a house. Then Rose reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were calloused from work, strong and capable, and they trembled slightly against his palm. "It has become more for me too," she whispered. I was afraid to admit it, afraid I was making another mistake, seeing something that was not really there. Kyle squeezed her hand gently. "It is there, Rose. I promise you it is real." They sat there as darkness fell around them, hands clasped, neither wanting to break the moment. When they finally went inside, Kyle walked Rose to her bedroom door. They stood in the hallway, still holding hands, neither quite ready to let go. "Good night, Rose," Kyle said softly. Rose stepped closer and, with a quickness that suggested she might lose her nerve if she thought about it, kissed his cheek. "Good night, Kyle." Everything changed after that evening, yet nothing changed at all. They still worked side by side during the day, still ate dinner together in the evenings. But now there were small touches as they passed in the house, hands brushing as they worked together in the garden, glances that held longer than necessary. They were courting, Kyle realized with amusement, courting while already married. In July, they made their first trip to Rapid City together to sell Rose's vegetables and cheese. The town was busier than Kyle remembered, swollen with new arrivals drawn by rumors of gold still to be found in the hills. They set up their goods at the edge of the Main Street market, and Rose's produce sold quickly. The cheese went even faster. "Mrs. Anderson," a voice called. They turned to see Martin Hayes approaching, his wife beside him. "Good to see you in town. This is my wife, Eleanor." Eleanor Hayes was a plump, cheerful woman with kind eyes. "I am so pleased to meet you both. Martin has been singing the praises of your cheese, Rose. May I purchase some?" As Rose and Eleanor haggled good-naturedly over cheese wheels, Hayes drew Kyle aside. "Your land is looking good, son. You have been working hard." "We both have," Kyle said. "Rose has taught me everything I know." Hayes nodded approvingly. "A good partner is worth their weight in gold." "Speaking of which, I wanted to let you know that there are a few ranchers meeting next month to discuss forming a proper cattlemen's association. Pool resources, coordinate drives, that sort of thing. I would like you to come if you are interested." "I am not sure I am a big enough operation to be useful to you," Kyle said honestly. "Size does not matter as much as character. From what I have seen, you have plenty of that. Think about it." On the ride home, Rose was quiet, thoughtful. Kyle let her be, focusing on the wagon and the rough trail. They were nearly home when she finally spoke. "Eleanor invited me to a gathering next month. Some of the ranchers' wives get together for quilting and socializing." "That sounds nice. You should go. Would you mind?" "It would mean being gone most of a day." Kyle looked at her in surprise. "Rose, you don't need my permission. You are not my prisoner. You are my partner. If you want to go, go." She smiled, that rare full smile that transformed her face. "Thank you. I think I would like to. Eleanor seems kind." "She does," Kyle agreed. Then, feeling bold, "And Hayes invited me to join some ranchers' association they are forming. He thinks we should be part of it." "We should," Rose said decisively. "Making connections with other ranchers only helps us. Plus, Hayes has been fair in his dealings with us. I trust his judgment." The summer passed in a blur of work and slow, sweet moments of discovery. Kyle found excuses to work near wherever Rose was, just to be in her presence. Rose began singing while she worked, her voice carrying across the valley like a gift. They shared smiles across the dinner table, conversations that stretched late into the night as they sat on the porch under stars that seemed impossibly bright. One evening in late August, after a particularly hot day spent repairing fence line, Kyle suggested they cool off in the creek. Rose looked scandalized at first, then thoughtful. "I suppose if we are discreet," she said. They walked down to the creek as the sun set, finding a spot where the water pooled deep enough to swim. Kyle turned his back while Rose entered the water in her chemise and drawers, and she did the same while he stripped to his trousers. The water was shockingly cold, fed by mountain snowmelt, and they both gasped and laughed as they waded in. They swam and floated, the day's heat washing away in the cold stream. At one point, Kyle dived under and surfaced near Rose, startling her. She splashed him in retaliation, and soon they were engaged in a full water fight, laughing like children. When they finally emerged, dripping and breathless, the sun had fully set. Rose was shivering slightly in the evening air. Without thinking, Kyle pulled her close, sharing his warmth. She stiffened for just a moment, then relaxed against him. "Kyle," she said softly, "I think I am falling in love with you." His heart felt too large for his chest. "I know I am falling in love with you," he replied, tipping her chin up to look at him. "In fact, I think I have been since the day you pointed that rifle at me." Rose laughed, the sound joyful and free. "That is a strange thing to fall in love with. Everything about us is strange. Why should falling in love be any different?" He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and she kissed him back. They stood there by the creek, the night gathering around them, and Kyle felt as if he had finally found the place he was meant to be. That night, Rose came to Kyle's room. No words were needed. They came together with tenderness and passion, the business arrangement transforming fully into a real marriage. Afterwards, lying in the darkness with Rose's head on his chest, Kyle felt a peace he had never known before. "No more separate bedrooms," Rose murmured sleepily. "No more separate bedrooms," Kyle agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. Autumn arrived with brilliant displays of gold and red in the aspens on the hillsides. They brought in Rose's garden harvest, preserving and storing food for the winter. Hayes retrieved his cattle, paid them in full, and immediately contracted for the next year. The Ranchers' Association had formed, and Kyle found himself part of a community for the first time since his parents died. Rose's friendship with Alina Hayes blossomed into something genuine. She began attending the monthly gatherings regularly, returning home with news, gossip, and increasingly elaborate quilting projects. She laughed more now, the shadows that had haunted her eyes when they first met finally fading. In October, they made the decision to purchase their own small herd of cattle, investing most of their savings into 20 head of good breeding stock. It was a risk, but a calculated one. With the range and water they had, they could build a real operation. The first snow fell in November, light and crystalline, transforming the valley into something magical. Kyle stood on the porch, watching it fall when Rose came out and wrapped a blanket around both of them, pulling him close. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How different my life is from a year ago. How much better." "Mine too," Rose said softly. "A year ago I was alone here, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake, if I would spend the rest of my life hiding from the world. Now I have a home, friends, a real marriage. I have you." Kyle turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. "You have me for as long as you want me, Rose Anderson. I love you." "I love you too," she said, and the words were sweeter than anything he had ever heard. They spent that winter cocooned in their home, venturing out only when necessary. The work continued, but at a slower pace. Kyle used the time to craft furniture, building Rose a proper dresser for her clothes, a bookshelf for the small collection of books they were accumulating. Rose sewed and mended, prepared meals that filled the house with warmth and good smells, and in the evenings they would read together by the fire or simply talk. It was during one of these quiet evenings in January that Rose made an announcement. "Kyle, I am with child." He stared at her, the words taking a moment to register. Then he was across the room, pulling her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. Eleanor helped me confirm it. The baby should come in late summer. A baby. Their baby." Kyle felt overwhelmed by the enormity of it, the responsibility and the joy intertwined. "Are you happy?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. Rose smiled, that radiant smile he loved so much. "I am terrified and thrilled and happier than I have any right to be. Are you?" "I feel the exact same way," he admitted. The winter seemed longer, knowing that spring would bring not just renewed work, but also preparation for their child. Kyle began building a cradle, carving it with careful attention to every detail. Rose started sewing baby clothes, tiny garments that seemed impossibly small. The Ranchers Association met in February at the Hayes Ranch, and Kyle made the trip despite the cold. It was there that he heard news that made his blood run cold. A man named David Morrison had been seen in Rapid City, claiming to be searching for his wayward fiancée who had run away west. Kyle rode home as fast as the winter trails would allow, bursting into the house to find Rose calmly stirring a pot on the stove. "David Morrison is in Rapid City," he said without preamble. The spoon clattered to the floor. Rose went pale, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "He cannot know I am here," she whispered. "How could he know? I don't know. But Rose, you are Rose Anderson now. You are my wife, carrying my child. He has no claim on you." "You don't understand what he is like," Rose said, her voice shaking. "He was so charming at first, but when I confronted him about his lies, he turned cruel. He told me no one would believe me, that I was nothing. What if he tries to cause trouble? What if he tells people lies about me?" Kyle pulled her close, feeling the tremors running through her body. "Let him try. We have friends here, Rose, people who know you, respect you, and you have me. I will not let him hurt you." But the fear lingered. Over the next weeks, every sound made Rose jump. Every visitor set her on edge. Kyle hated seeing the confidence she had built crumble under the threat of her past returning. The confrontation came in early March. Kyle was in town purchasing supplies when David Morrison approached him outside the general store. He was a handsome man, Kyle noted with distaste, with slick dark hair and an easy smile that did not reach his cold eyes. "You must be Anderson," Morrison said, his tone conversational. "I understand you have my Rose." "Rose is my wife," Kyle said firmly. "Legally married, you have no claim on her." Morrison's smile widened. "Legally married to a woman who was engaged to me. That seems questionable. I could make trouble for you, Anderson, a lot of trouble. Unless we can come to some arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Kyle asked, though he already suspected. "Let us say $500 and I disappear. Continue my search elsewhere." Kyle felt rage building in his chest. "You want me to pay you to leave my wife alone? Think of it as compensation for the distress she caused me, running off without a word." "She ran because you were already married. You are the liar here, Morrison." Morrison shrugged. "That is one version of events. I have another version. Who do you think people will believe? A respected businessman or a man who married a woman of questionable virtue?" Kyle's hand moved toward his gun, but he stopped himself. Violence would only make things worse. "Get out of town, Morrison. Rose and I have done nothing wrong. If you try to spread lies about her, you will answer to me and every rancher in this valley." "Brave words," Morrison said, his expression hardening. "But I wonder if you will feel so brave when your wife's past becomes common knowledge." Morrison left town that evening, but the damage was done. Rumors began circulating, vague insinuations about Rose's past, about the marriage being somehow improper. Kyle wanted to punch someone, preferably Morrison, but Rose counseled patience. Lies fall apart under the weight of truth. she said, though he could see the hurt in her eyes. "We know the truth. Our friends know the truth. The gossips will find something else to talk about soon enough." She was right, though it took time. Eleanor Hayes proved to be a staunch defender, shutting down gossip wherever she encountered it. Martin Hayes did the same among the men. Gradually, the rumors faded, especially when it became obvious that Rose was pregnant and that the Andersons were a devoted couple. Morrison never returned, and eventually they learned he had been run out of the territory after attempting a similar extortion scheme against a territorial judge. The knowledge brought Rose a sense of closure she had not realized she needed. "He cannot hurt me anymore," she said wonderingly one evening. "All these years I gave him so much power over me, let my fear of him shape my life. But he was always just a small, petty man, and now he is gone." Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the valley. Their cattle, which had survived the winter well, began producing calves. The ranch was thriving, and so were they. Rose's pregnancy progressed without complication, though she grew increasingly uncomfortable as summer heat set in. On a blazing hot day in late August, Rose's labor began. Eleanor Hayes came to help, having delivered half a dozen babies in her time. Kyle paced nervously outside, then on the porch, then just outside the bedroom door until Eleanor finally took pity on him and let him in. "Hold her hand and keep your mouth shut," she instructed. Kyle did as he was told, watching in awe and terror as Rose brought their child into the world. She was incredible, fierce and strong even in her exhaustion. When the baby's first cry filled the room, Kyle felt tears streaming down his face. "A son," Eleanor announced, placing the tiny, squalling infant on Rose's chest. "A healthy, strong son." Rose looked down at their baby with wonder, then up at Kyle. "We have a son." Kyle leaned down to kiss her forehead, then gently touched the baby's impossibly small hand. "What should we name him, James?" Rose said without hesitation. "After your father." They named him James Silas Anderson, honoring both of Kyle's parents. Jimmy, as they quickly began calling him, was a content baby, with his mother's amber eyes and his father's dark hair. Kyle had never imagined he could love anything as much as he loved his son. The next years passed in a happy blur. The ranch prospered. They expanded their herd, repaired and improved the buildings, and slowly transformed the forgotten property Kyle had purchased for $500 into a thriving operation. More settlers moved into the area, and a small community began to develop. When Jimmy was 2, Rose became pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to twin girls, much to everyone's surprise. They named them Sarah and Emma, and suddenly the house was full of noise and laughter and love. Kyle would sometimes stand on the porch in the evening, watching Rose play with the children in the yard, and feel overwhelmed by gratitude. He thought about that first day, riding up to find a woman with a rifle defending the home she had built from nothing. He thought about the wild proposal he had made, the marriage of convenience that had become the greatest love of his life. "What are you smiling about?" Rose asked, coming to stand beside him. The children were finally asleep, the house quiet except for the usual settling sounds. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," Kyle said, pulling her close. "How lucky we are. Do you ever regret it? The way we started?" Rose asked, though he could hear in her voice that she knew the answer. "Not for a single second. You are the best decision I ever made, Rose Anderson. Even when I pointed a rifle at you." "Especially then," Kyle said and kissed her. The ranch continued to grow over the years. Jimmy grew into a serious boy who loved working with the cattle, trailing after his father from the time he could walk. The twins were inseparable, bright and curious and constantly getting into mischief. When they were 5, Rose gave birth to another son, Samuel, who seemed determined to keep up with his older siblings from the moment he could crawl. The Dakota Territory changed around them too. In 1889, it was divided into North Dakota and South Dakota, both admitted as states. The wild, rough territory they had known was becoming more settled, more civilized. Towns grew, railroads expanded, and the days of the wide open frontier began to fade. But the valley where they lived seemed somehow protected from time, still beautiful and wild. The creek still ran clear, the grass still grew tall, and the work of ranching continued with the rhythm of the seasons. When Kyle turned 45, he realized with some surprise that he had lived on the ranch for nearly 20 years. 2 decades since that day, he rode up with nothing but a deed and hope. Rose was 42, still beautiful, though her dark hair now had threads of silver, and laugh lines crinkled the corners of her eyes. They sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun set as they had done thousands of times before. The children were older now. Jimmy was 18, already managing much of the ranch work himself. The twins were 16, capable and confident young women. Samuel was 11, all gangly limbs and endless energy. "You ever think about what would have happened if I had not bought this ranch?" Kyle asked suddenly. Rose considered the question. "Sometimes. I think I would have stayed here until someone forced me to leave. Then I would have drifted somewhere else, probably spent my life alone, too afraid to trust anyone again. What about you?" "I would have kept drifting. Probably ended up a hired hand somewhere, working someone else's land, never putting down roots. I would have been lonely and would not have even realized it." "Instead, you got a wife who threatened you with a rifle," Rose said, smiling. "Best $500 I ever spent," Kyle said, and they both laughed. Jimmy came around the corner of the house, leading his horse. "I am heading up to check the north pasture," he called. "Some of the cattle wandered that way this morning." "Take Sam with you," Kyle called back. "He could use the riding practice." "Already got him," Jimmy said, and sure enough, Samuel appeared behind him, practically bouncing with excitement. Kyle watched his sons ride off together, feeling that familiar swell of pride and love. They had built something here, he and Rose. Not just a ranch, but a family, a legacy. "I am proud of them," Rose said softly, following his gaze. "All of them." "We did well, Kyle. We did," he agreed. "Though most of the credit goes to you, you were the one who made this place a home long before I arrived." Rose leaned her head on his shoulder. "We made it a home together. Neither of us could have done it alone." The years continued to pass, each one adding new joys and challenges. Sarah fell in love with a young rancher from the next valley over, and Kyle walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. Emma decided she wanted to teach and went off to a normal school in Rapid City, though she visited often. Samuel developed a talent for working with horses, breeding and training them for sale. Jimmy stayed on the ranch, working side by side with his father. When he was 23, he married a sweet girl named Clara from town, and they built a house on the eastern edge of the property. Kyle and Rose became grandparents, then grandparents several times over. The ranch that Kyle had bought for $500 was now worth thousands, a testament to decades of hard work and careful stewardship. But Kyle never measured its worth in dollars. Its value lay in the life he and Rose had built there, in the children they had raised, in the love that had grown from the strangest of beginnings. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Kyle surprised Rose with a gift. He had been working on it secretly for months, carving and polishing until it was perfect. It was a wooden sign, beautifully crafted with words burned into the smooth surface. Anderson Ranch, ESD, 1882, built on faith and love. Rose cried when she saw it, happy tears that she quickly wiped away. "It is perfect," she said. Absolutely perfect. They hung the sign over the ranch entrance together, and Kyle pulled Rose close, looking out over the land they had tamed and loved for 3 decades. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For not shooting me that first day. For taking a chance on a crazy proposal. For loving me. For everything." Rose turned in his arms to face him. Despite the years, despite the gray in her hair and the lines on her face, she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Thank you for seeing past a scared woman with a rifle. For offering me a home when I had nowhere else to go. For loving me when I had forgotten how to be loved. You saved my life, Kyle Anderson." "We saved each other," Kyle said, and kissed her as the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. As they grew older, Kyle and Rose began to slow down, gradually turning more of the ranch operations over to Jimmy and his growing family. But they never truly retired. Kyle could still be found mending fences or checking on the cattle most mornings. Rose still tended her garden, which had grown over the years to include flowers as well as vegetables. They had built something remarkable together, transforming an abandoned property into a thriving legacy that would continue long after they were gone. But more than that, they had built a love that had weathered storms and seasons, growing stronger with each passing year. On a warm summer evening, as they approached their 40th anniversary, Kyle and Rose sat on their porch as the sun set. Their grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Sarah and her husband had come for a visit, and Emma was home from teaching for the summer. The house was full of family, full of life and love. "You remember the conditions you set that first day?" Kyle asked, watching the children play. "Separate bedrooms, business arrangement, equal say in decisions." Rose laughed, that full, joyful sound that still made his heart skip. "I remember. I was so determined to protect myself, to keep everything businesslike and safe." "I am glad you changed your mind about the separate bedrooms." "So am I," Rose said, squeezing his hand. "Though I have kept the equal say in decisions. You would run this place into the ground without me." "Absolutely true," Kyle agreed without hesitation. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching their family. This was what mattered, Kyle thought, not the land or the cattle or the money. This, the people they loved, the life they had built together. "I love you, Rose Anderson," Kyle said, as he had said countless times over the past 40 years. "I love you too, Kyle Anderson," Rose replied, as she always did. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, they remained on the porch, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a love that would last forever. The ranch that had begun as a desperate gamble, a forgotten property purchased for $500, had become a home filled with generations of love. Kyle thought about the young man he had been, drifting and lost, spending everything he had on a property site unseen. He thought about Rose, alone and afraid, building a life from nothing in an abandoned house. Two broken people who had found each other and become whole. The forgotten ranch had given them everything, but they had given it life. And as they sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the sound of their children and grandchildren, Kyle knew that he would not change a single moment of their journey. Every hardship, every challenge, every joy had led them to this perfect evening, to this perfect life. Their story was written in the land itself, in every fence post Kyle had set, every plant Rose had tended, every building they had raised together. It was written in the faces of their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they would leave behind. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed down through the generations, but it would always carry the story of how it began. How a man bought a forgotten ranch for $500 and found a woman living there who changed everything. How that woman, fierce and afraid, took a chance on a stranger's wild proposal. How together they built not just a ranch, but a life filled with more love than either had ever dreamed possible. As the stars filled the sky above their valley, Kyle and Rose sat together, hands clasped, hearts full, grateful for every moment of the incredible journey that had brought them here. They had found their home, found their purpose, and found in each other a love that would endure forever.